Hi, everyone. I know it's a little late, but good night. How are we doing? Hope we're doing pretty good. All right. Well, to get us started right off the bat, I am Justin. I am going to be taking you guys through how to read with an analytical mind, but not more in the sense where I'm going to be lecturing you on how to do it or like what it is. I'm just going to be more giving you suggestions because especially when it comes to AP Lang, it's a very subjective class. And what I mean by subjective is that it's a class that you will only get from AP Lang what you put into AP Lang. Um, it's very much a class that it's going to teach you how to work at your own pace. And that's sometimes a good and a bad thing because when it comes to reading, you can't be forced to understand something. You kind of have to train your mind and the way that you react and you respond to a text as you read more. And right now, early in the year, I'm sure some of you guys are a little stressed out. You're like, I don't know how to read and identify literary terms or like strategies and stuff like that. And that's okay. As you do it and as it comes with practice, and hopefully after tonight, you can leave with a better understanding of how to do it and how to read with an analytical mind. And analytical mind more specifically refers to as you're reading, you're also analyzing and drawing conclusions. And especially when it comes to the AP exam, you don't really have time to read it once to make sure you know what's going on, read it another time to make sure that you are 100% sure about what's going on, and read it one more time to analyze for literary terms and plot structure and all that. You really have to kind of nail it the first time that you read a passage. So that's what we're going to be going over today. So reading with an analytical mind. And it really it can seem like a lot, but I promise it really does get easier as you do it. And when you read text and like stuff that you yourself enjoy, it just naturally happens. And you'll realize that as like as time goes on and as you stay in the class a little bit longer. So be sure to give us a follow on social media at ThinkFiveable. We have streams going on every day of every week. We're going to be talking about what is an analytical mind? Where can I get one? What's the point? And then an example of how to do it. Um, like I said, it's really an analytical mind. This is more training your brain and the who training your brain to respond to certain things within a text. Like there will be certain triggers within a text that say, "Oh, this is an example of personification. This is an example of the rising action or the rising exposition." These are just things that you need to consider as you're reading. So, what is an analytical mind? So, there are three types of analyzation. The first type is called passive analyzation, and this is what happens first. This is what happens when you're just reading through and you're kind of like you're making decisions or you're making connections rather just by reading. Let's say you're reading a paragraph that says the ball is red, and then the boy's t-shirt is red, and his favorite color is red. You can assume that his favorite color is red without it being explicitly told to you. If everything in his room is red or blue or green, you can assume that maybe he has an affinity for that color. That's an example of a passive connection. It doesn't really take any conscious thought to make that decision. The next type of analyzation is conscious analyzation. So let's say his favorite color was actually orange, but he has a mix of orange things and green things and red things. And then he kind of hints at it through dialogue, maybe saying, "Oh, I don't prefer yellow, I prefer orange." Then you can assume that his favorite color is orange, and the things that he has in orange are maybe his favorite things or things that he enjoys most. So those are the things that like you have to sit back and think. And with conscious analyzation usually comes you're making inferences about the text, which I'll go into more later about interacting with the text. But you know you have to make those connections on your own, and sometimes they may take a second, sometimes they may only take a split second. It's just a matter of like what what should I devote my time to, and especially when you're under the pressure of the AP exam, you don't really have the luxury of reading something over. I mean, you have maybe two or three times and that's it, and then you have to start writing that beautiful essay. But when you're writing your essay, you can also make these type of conscious analyzation, making those connections. And then the final type of analyzation is conclusive analyzation. So now that you've already made the passive ones, the simple things, now that you've already thought about the things that you need to think about, maybe thought-evoking questions or rhetorical questions that the author writes for the audience to respond to, now you have to figure out, what does this do? And especially with the rhetorical analysis, you're answering the why, the so what. Why is the author doing it? That's rhetorical analysis. You're literally analyzing the rhetoric, which is the words and the paragraphs and the sentences and the structure and everything that makes up a paragraph. So, you're going to be thinking about, what does this mean and how does it contribute to maybe a character's growth or their degrowth or their fatal flaw or their tragic flaw. It's things that you need to draw upon. You have to draw your own conclusions. And that's one of the luxuries about literature. Sometimes there's a set response to certain types of questions, and sometimes there isn't. But with conclusive analyzation, as you train your brain to do it, you naturally make your own conclusions. And it's kind of like making a hypothesis in a science experiment. You can predict what's going to happen, but that doesn't mean it's going to be right. It could be right. It could be wrong. It could change. It's just all about, what does this do in the grand scheme of the text. And then reading with an analytical mind, just overall, it just reduces the time you have to spend reading. Like I said, in an AP exam, you don't really have the time to read things 5, 6 times. You have to start chugging the moment the clock starts. You got to start going. Um, and part of this is about reading and comprehending what you're reading at the same time, which sometimes takes a second. You'll read a paragraph, and especially when it comes to big artists like Shakespeare or like John Steinbeck, those people that use really big words, and the paragraphs are pages long. So you have to think back and you have to be like, okay, so this is what I thought before I started the paragraph, and this is what I know and what I think now after I've read the paragraph. So it just helps you reduce the time that you have to spend actually reading, and then it lets you start writing and planning out your essay a lot more, which you will be thankful for in the long term, that you've had a lot of time to plan out your essay. All right, so this is kind of explaining how it works. So let's say you read a paragraph and it says initial reading, and then it goes to passive analyzation, and then conscious analyzation. And then there's other thoughts and observations and conclusive analyzation. Sabrina, we will be having a replay of the like a replay or a video of the stream going up soon, so that you'll be able to refer back to it if you need to, along with my commentary. This will be here also. But if you need just the slides, then you could just, mute me, and then you can just watch the rest of the video. But this is what we have going on. You have your initial reading. So this is when you first read it, that passive analyzation, right? And then as you're reading, you do make the passive connections. And these are going to be things that, basic things. And sometimes the author hands these to you, and sometimes they also do not. And that's when you're going to be going to your conscious analyzation. This is where you have to really consider, what is going on? Why is the author doing this? Why did they choose to include this at this part, a specific part of the story? And then other thoughts and observations. So this is going to be your inferences. These are going to be your responses to questions. Maybe you're asking the author a question. These are going to be your things that are not necessarily analyzation techniques, and more, you reacting. And then conclusive analyzation, I already went over that. That's going to be you drawing everything in. What my conscious analyzation, my conclusions from that, my passive analyzation conclusions, putting those two together, your conclusive analyzation. All right. How do I develop an analytical mind? We're going to be here for a minute. Reading is meant to be interactive. This is the thing I stress the most when I do streams and when I talk to people about AP Lang. Do not be afraid to almost talk to the author in the margins. Make notes, underline, and mark appealing or interesting sentences, and ask questions. You will find that when you interact with the piece that you're reading, when you ask questions that you want to be answered or questions that you don't want to know the answer to, reading just becomes so much more enjoyable, and you enjoy it a lot more because it's not just another brainless activity. You're actually contributing to something, and what the author has written is essentially going to use, and it's making you think, and it's making you talk. In AP Lang, interacting with the text will help you a lot. Starting now at the beginning of the year, or if you're in the middle of the year, just start trying it out. Because when you get to that AP exam, you're going to want to have those questions written out. Because sometimes those questions will be what you use in your essay, or sometimes the answers or the lack to those questions will be what you use in your essay. So, and try and psych yourself up for whatever you're reading, even if it's about last year's AP exam was about, we'll be going over it too. I have it in here. It's talking about like the salt trade between India and Britain, and how Gandhi delivered this speech telling the British that they're not going to stand for oppression anymore. And as someone who was taking AP World at the time, I found it interesting because I was taking AP World, but then also because it was within the past 100 years. It's not that old, you know? It's about getting yourself excited for what you want to read. Because if you just go into the AP exam, or you go into anything you're reading and you're just like, oh, this is going to be boring, or I am not going to enjoy it, then you're not going to. Try and enjoy what you're reading. You only get to take AP Lang once, and then you're on to much, even more difficult AP Lit. Um, just enjoy AP Lang. Enjoy it. Interact with what you're reading. Read books because you want to read books and you want to develop that analytical mind. Reading can become a lot more fun, and it become a lot more enjoyable. And you can even develop it as a hobby when you do it and you're interacting with the author. So, ask yourself also, after you read your text, kind of ask yourself, what does this book serve? Where does this fit in history? What does it mean? Who is the author? You have to be sure to read the italicized information in the text prior to actually reading the text. And that is going to be your preface. It's going to let time period. It's going to let setting. It's going to let author's background, who delivered it, when they delivered it, to whom they delivered it to. you know that people take that background information for granted, but that actually is going to be your biggest savior, because it's getting you in the mood. It's getting you in the correct lens, if you will, for what you're about to read. And it's going to help you a lot, especially when you're doing your rhetorical analysis, because you only want to stay within the confines of that text. You want to know what's going on and who it is and when they did it and who they were talking to. You know, just as reading is interactive, all books and all literature was written for an audience. Who was that intended audience? Are we the intended audience? Was Parliament the intended audience? Was Gandhi the intended audience? You know, um, so those are just things that you might want to ask yourself. And even though AP Lang on the exam, those passages are very short, they do have they were specifically picked and cropped the way they were for a reason, because there's a significant beginning, middle, and end in them, and they might not be apparent. And not every story has a super action-packed climax. Sometimes it's just the author blending in from what they were trying to say to saying it to moving forward. And that's something you'll find a lot with, like, eulogies and speeches and commencement speeches. you know those are not intended to tell stories. I mean, sometimes they are, but for the most part they're really written to say, here's where we are now, and here's where we're going from here. you know so all about developing an analytical mind is just more of realizing what reading is. Reading is not just sitting down and getting immersed in a story, contrary to what people think. It's about having a conversation in your head with the characters, and kind of wondering, like, what does this mean? What does that mean? How does this all fit in? You know. So this is actually a student response to a poem called "A Chinese Bull" by Katha Pullett, and this is you in AP Lang. You will not be analyzing poems, but this is just an example of kind of what it looks like. You have in the first paragraph, or the first two stanzas rather, you have the student annotating for imagery, and then above the title, you can even see them in, like, trying to guess or trying to point out what the overall theme is of the poem. you know Innocence, or it be or the loss of, or it leaving. And then even if you keep going, you can see the images evoke nostalgia, and that kind of leads to how the theme is more apparent. um and then when they note the assertion, that kind of contrasts from earlier parts of the poem. And that little arrow right there, it represents a tonal shift, which is going to be more of your, especially in poetry, because a lot of poets love to use beautiful words and then just cut to the chase. But Prose and poetry, even though they're different forms, they're analyzed very much in the same light. Um, Also, another thing, and this might help you when you're analyzing prose more, which we'll get to in a moment. You want to number your paragraphs and number your stanzas and your lines. Um, Stanzas and lines for poetry specifically, because when you're going through that your essay, you don't really want to have to spend time going, okay, so this is the first paragraph, one, two, three, four, five. That time adds up. Those 3 seconds that you spend every time looking for that quote, that 3 seconds becomes six, becomes nine, becomes 12, 15, 18, and those 18 seconds could be what you needed to score that five, to score that four. So, when Catherine Howard goes over more with the organization and stuff, you'll learn more about how to do things, specifically with your best interest and your timing in mind. Um, but going back to the annotations here, um, even at the end, it's the reader is asking questions. It's like missing innocence, family problems, mistakes and regrets. That's what reading is about. You don't want to just sit there and you just don't want to, like, let it drag on. Ask questions. Like, just get involved in it, because it's all about this journey. Always, poetry a little bit more than prose, but in any AP reading class, you're going on a journey with every piece that you read. So don't be afraid to get immersed for a second. Wonder what was going through the author's head when they wrote this. What prompted them to write this, and why did they do it in the way that they did? It's just, this is, I think this is a good example, because it kind of shows, even though this is a little minimalistic compared to like what I would do, um, it is a good example of how simple it can be to, interact with the text. um, it's as simple as writing questions and boxing things. I'm writing too, or this is happiness, and drawing arrows, or visually connecting arrows and drawing pictures as you're reading a piece can actually help you a lot more than you think. A lot of people like, just to read it and not mark it up. Draw pictures, ask questions in the margins, say you hate it or say you love it. You don't have to like everything you read, but you do have to look for how the rhetoric is used, syntax, sentence structure, vocabulary, literary devices, all those things. So, don't be afraid to get opinionated with what you're reading, because at the end of the day, you have to analyze it. Pick a side and enjoy it a little bit. It doesn't have to be just black and white. Here is the essay. You must read the essay and write an another essay based off of the. It doesn't have to always be like that. Have a little fun with it. Don't be afraid to be witty and be clever with how you write your essays in response to pieces like this. So now, what's the point of developing an analytical mind? Most students fail this exam due to poor time management. This exam is not like many others. A lot of people do take that 15-minute reading period for granted. You can do a lot in 15 minutes before the time starts actually going against you. Make sure that you're always working. You know, and don't really be spending too much time on a particular passage. Reading with the analytical mind is about drawing your conclusions early so you can revisit them later. Mentally prepares you for multiple choice questions. So even though this is more about rhetorical analysis, when you read with a word like analytical mind, you can almost kind of guess what the questions are going to be about. As you read more and as you do some mocks maybe, and you go through some other years as exams, you're going to realize that the College Board kind of follows not a formula per se, but their questions are very much geared, and they're kind of built in the same light. They're going to be asking some stuff about how does this line like sound in context? How does this line sound out of context? Um, it's just little questions like that that really just kind of you can kind of prepare yourself, and you can be on the lookout almost. And some people do like to read the question for before in an essay, obviously read the question first. But when it comes to multiple choice, people like to read the question and the answers first and then read. That all goes back to the analytical mind thing, reading, drawing your conclusions, comprehending all at once. Comprehension versus answering. Now, the reason why I really enjoy AP Lang and I like talking about it is because reading and learning in general, it just shows that you retain the information for longer and that you're not just answering a question. Remember that even though this is a hard class and you may feel overwhelmed, you're going to be fine. I promise. You just got to take a deep breath and realize you're in good hands, and you definitely have it in you. Anyone does. But you also have to realize that these are skills that you will be using in some of your other classes. If you're taking AP World, you're going to be analyzing DBQs and SAQs and LEQs, documents, those synthesis questions. So, reading with an analytical mind, it's a tongue twister, is just a life skill in general. And this is a great place to start fostering that because you can use it in all spheres of your life. It is such a useful life skill. Um, and then it helps you better understand and analyze literature, which is also another life skill. If you start reading as a hobby and you start doing it because you actually enjoy it, it'll just come. And being able to accurately express and dissect key themes from literature and art is a common life skill that translates beyond this class. It's going to translate into your job. It's going to translate into your career, into your family life, the way you look at culture and society and politics and everything in history. It's a very useful life skill that it's important to start thinking about now. And, maybe reading with an analytical mind is not what you want to call it. Maybe you would prefer to read and then analyze. But, in terms of AP, you have to remember there is time constraints. As much as we don't like them, you are timed. And this essay, this one, a little bit more than the synthesis and the argumentative, this one, a lot of people do score lower on the rhetorical analysis. And that's just simply because it's difficult. It's hard. When I first started doing this class and I was told to do what some of you guys are told to be doing now, it was light years out of my ability. But, when you just start interacting with the text, as I mentioned before, and you start, you know, is about just training yourself, conditioning yourself to doing the same things and, asking those questions, you will all be all right. All right. So now this is our example. So I'm going to be reading you the italicized text, and then we're going to go through this together. In 1930, Mohandas Mahatma Gandhi led a nonviolent march in India protesting Britain's colonial monopoly on the taxation of essential resource, salt. The Salt March, as it came to be known, was a triggering movement for the largest civil disobedience that eventually won India independence from Britain in 1947. Shortly before the Salt March, Gandhi had written to Viceroy Lord Irwin, the representative of the British Crown in India. The passage below is the conclusion of that letter. Read the passage carefully. Then, in a well written essay, analyze the rhetorical choices Gandhi makes to present his case to Lord Irwin. Now, this is not the entire essay. This is just 3 paragraphs. So, obviously, some of those rhetorical choices are not going to be very apparent. But when it comes to the full length thing, remember, those the ones that you want to include in your thesis statement and the ones that you're going to want to talk about need to be prevalent in both beginning, middle, and end. If you're only, like, let's say he uses imagery, Gandhi only uses imagery in the first paragraph. If he doesn't use it in the second and third, I might want to reconsider making that one of my, my main ideas, because if it's not consistent, then your essay is you're going to run out of steam halfway through. So let's just go through, and then we're going to stop and talk about it after each paragraph, kind of see what's going on. I know that in embarking on nonviolence, I shall be running what might fairly be termed a mad risk, but the victories of truth have never been won without risks, often of the gravest character. Conversion of a nation that has consciously or unconsciously preyed upon another, far more numerous, far more ancient, and no less cultured than itself, is worthy any amount of risk. So we can kind of start to see here that Gandhi, the literary devices are not as apparent as they are in some other pieces, but we do see that he is kind of challenging the norms that are put upon him in society. He even says, I know that in embarking on nonviolence, I shall be running what might fairly be termed a mad risk. He knows that what he's doing is risky, so the rest of his essay is going to be in response to that what if. I have deliberately used the word conversion, for my ambition is no less than to convert the British people through nonviolence, and thus to make them see the wrong they have done to India. I do not seek to harm your people. I want to serve them even as I want to serve my own. I believe that I have always served them. Now that we've read the first two paragraphs, we can see that the word nonviolence is something that is coming up a lot, and even when it's not explicitly said, he is implying it through I do not seek to harm your people. This idea of peace and this idea of non-violence and staying true to the non-violent movement, that is another thing we can consider. Maybe repetition of this idea is going to come up in the third paragraph. That's a little bit longer than the other two. But right off the bat, we can kind of see examples of how, he's kind of bringing in this idea and how he's, uh, portraying it through what he's saying. I served them up to 1919, blindly. But when my eyes were open and I conceived non cooperation, the object was still to serve them. I employed the same weapon that I have, in all humility, successfully used against the dearest members of my family. If I have equal love for your people with mine, it will not long remain hidden. It will be acknowledged by them, even as the members of my family acknowledged, after they had tried me for several years. If the people join me, as I expect they will, the sufferings they will undergo, unless the British nation sooner retraces its steps, will be enough to melt the stoniest hearts. So, this is. I remember reading this. It's a really interesting piece, and I encourage you guys to go onto the College Board website and read the entire essay. Um, this is just going back to that idea of, the nonviolence. He even goes on to say the the sufferings they will undergo, unless the British nation sooner retraces its steps, will be enough to melt the stoniest hearts. That stoniest hearts is an image, and you can imagine like a stone made into the shape of a heart, and it being melted by this sense of history repeating itself, and history looking down on them. So pretty much what Gandhi is setting us up for in these first three paragraphs is the inevitable here's what you did later on. Right now it seems like he might be dodging around the whole question of what is Gandhi going to do in response to the Salt March and what is all of this about. But as it may seem that there's nothing really building up here, he's setting us up for his main idea. And while it explicitly says that his main idea is to serve them, even as he wants to serve his own, he has not he's not gotten to the core of his argument. The third paragraph is really setting us up for what he has been really trying to say, and that he's saying, my family knows what happened. They pretty much shunned me for my nonviolence and sticking up to the British. And now I'm going to tell you what the impact of your actions have had on this society. And it's just the way he builds it. And then from the very beginning, and as you can see, if you read the rest of the essay, you can see that his tone very much varies. In the first paragraph, it seems that he's very inspirational. He's saying, I don't care how bad the journey is. I don't care how long it's going to take me. I'm going to do it, and I am going to embark on this journey, and I am going to give you this, and you are going to listen to what I have to say because it is what you need to hear. And in the second paragraph, he is saying, I'm not doing this on accident. I am doing this because it is what needs to be done for humanitarian efforts, societal efforts. He's pretty much saying this is the way it has to be. You know, this it was inevitable, and conversion and nonviolence and seeking this place of leveled ground. It's important that you kind of relate to that in your opening paragraph. And then in the third paragraph, we have this new sense of aggravation kind of make itself known. He's saying that he was blind and that he didn't know and that he could feel him and his ancestors, they could feel this sense of depravity. It's this almost a sense of anger kind of festering. And then one day it just breaks. And then here you are analyzing this essay. You know, it's it's just the tonal shifts, and even in the rest of the essay, he does a very good job of kind of switching between all professionalism per se and the sense of here is what we want, and here is how we want it, and here is what you are going to do. And later on in the essay, he even begins to call out Lord Irwin by name. And even though this is only specific to this piece, in any piece, when it is addressed to someone by name, or they say you, or they say the reader, you are part of the story for a reason. And in this case, even though this letter was written to Lord Irwin, we are observing and we're watching and we're seeing history flip over on its head, and we're seeing everything change, and you know we're seeing the beginning of something new. And that's kind of what analyzing is all about. And you can even like the analytical mind thing. You read the paragraph and then you take a second and you're like, what does this mean? Why does it mean anything? And then it's a gradual process. Reading an AP Lang is kind of like going up a ladder. When you first start the piece, you're at the bottom. You have no idea what to expect. You've just read the preface and you're like, all right, we're reading something about Gandhi and Lord Irwin and the Salt March in the 1930s. I know what it's about, but I don't know what to expect. And then you go up another rung on the ladder after you've read the first paragraph. You're like, okay, so the tone is established. Gandhi is in prose, if you get a prose or you get a story, his voice is being established, and now that we have Gandhi establishing himself as talking, and we hear him establishing himself as a figure for nonviolence and someone that is in support of diplomacy and is in support of looking for peace and the sense of tranquility between two rival nations, we can expect the rest of his essay to go like that. But then in the second paragraph, we see this assertion. We see this almost a sense of, I want peace, but I am willing to go to X length to get it. And that represents a tonal shift. If I was annotating this similar to the poem we looked at, I would draw an arrow right after the first paragraph because that really represents a new part of the letter. It represents that, we got that preface and we have that introduction, and now we're building up. And now we're getting to his demands. And we're getting to the part where he expects something in return from what they've endured for so long. And then we have the third paragraph, which, him bringing his family into it and him talking about his ancestors and him talking about they, how they turned him away. It just, it's so, it's a perfect, an amazing example of how tone and author's voice develops over the course of something that's not just a story. You know, people people tend to talk the way that they write nowadays, but when you have something like this and it's polished and they're supposed to be intended up and down, and he's calling Lord Irwin out by name. He's saying, Lord Irwin, this letter is for you and for Parliament and for all of Britain. It's important that you read the preface and kind of get that. As I mentioned before, audience is almost as important as who the author is, you know? So, and then, you have words such as humility and successfully, and then conversion, nonviolence, retraces its steps to melt the stoniest hearts. If I have equal love for your people with mine, it will not long remain hidden. It's just, there's a, there's certain words that Gandhi could have chosen to use. Take a second and realize, why did he use those? What about these words makes them so special that he chose to use them? He could have taken out humility and just put in all my gratitude, in all my years of life, successfully used against the dearest members of my family. Each word was handcrafted and picked for a reason. And there might come a time where we or there might be some times where you don't know the answer. Why some words were picked. Why did Gandhi choose to use to melt the stoniest hearts? Well, maybe because it's a saying, or maybe because he intended to evoke that image of a stone literally melting, of that sense of peace and this sense of, you know, we will follow blindly, melting. And that is kind of a metaphor, you know? this melting of the stoniest hearts is just it's like someone putting their foot down. It's them saying, this is the end of what we thought, and this is the new way that things are going to be. And that's what AP Lang is all about. And that's what having an analytical mind is all about. It's asking these types of questions and, wondering why. You know, don't be afraid to question the author or question your teacher. Um, the best conclusions are usually drawn when you ask questions. And some of the best conclusions are drawn when you ask a question and no one knows the answer to it. Because then you ponder and you wonder. As I mentioned before, we might never know why humility was chosen. You know, why he chose to repeat nonviolence, but when it comes to that rhetorical analysis, you have to analyze why he chose them. In your inferences and based off what you're reading and the preface and what you know about the time period and what you know about Gandhi and what you know about where he's from and the people that look up to him today, you have to draw some conclusions. So if I was going to write an essay, I think I would make mine, at least so far, is that if we have to write an essay analyzing the rhetorical choices that he uses to present his case to Lord Irwin, I would maybe say the repetition of words such as nonviolence to show maybe his longing for peace and for the end of a years long conflict, and tone. The development of a tone, as much as contrary to what maybe some of your teachers might be telling you, it is very much a literary device. The development of a tone and the development of an arc of a theme and an idea it's a device and it's something that the author has to craft. And you know in this three paragraphs you can easily see that the development of it kind of make itself known. And these things might seem a little bland at first and they might not make a lot of sense. But as I mentioned before, it's going to be all about training yourself and whatnot. So, all right. Does anyone have any questions for me before we continue on? I'm going to be revisiting some of the other slides just to kind of, add some stuff and maybe go over some things. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the box. Just let me know. I am here. All right. So I wanted to go back to this slide for just a moment because there was something I forgot to mention, and that is larger scope. So even when we were reading the piece that we just read regarding the letter to Gandhi, or the letter from Gandhi to Lord Irwin, when it comes to literature, there's a reason why certain pieces are picked for the AP exam, and there are a reason why certain pieces are not picked for the AP exam. You will not see Harry Potter on the AP exam. The College Board picks things of literary merit, which is subjective, but they're mainly looking for things that can be condensed and still have a consistent structure, and where the devices and things are very apparent and they make sense. So, if we wanted to consider the letter, the larger scope could be, you know, British influence was drastically reduced following that, and there was a rebellion in the years to follow. And Gandhi was a major spokesperson for those rebellions and those movements for freedom, but those non-violent movements. So, that's all what this class is about. Larger scope. Think beyond this black and white text. What does this letter or this poem or this story, what does it mean? And what is it doing for us as the reader? If you every everything was written to evoke something. Not everything is going to be the happy ending. Not everything is going to have a very conclusive ending, or not everything is going to be very straightforward. But it's a matter of developing the analytical mind. And as I said before, it might seem a little difficult, but I promise, as you just go through it and as you do stuff and as you wonder and as you ask questions and you develop a relationship with reading, it becomes so much easier and it becomes fun. And, you know, I wish I was able to put the rest of the essay in here, but I do really encourage you guys to go read it because it is such a well-crafted essay. And it really is it's a pivotal essay for AP Lang. It's a very beginner friendly essay because my analysis might be a little bit more in depth than what maybe one of you think. But at the end of the day, the ideas connect. If you are able to decipher and you're able to pick out those things that are apparent through repetition or emphasis, then you're doing your job in this class. All right. Well, that is all for tonight. If anyone has any more questions, I'm willing to stick around for a little bit longer. We have one. How do we improve our ability to recognize devices and tones, text faster or more accurately? Are there certain things we can practice daily or over the course of the year to help? This is a really good question. Um, so, how do we improve our ability to recognize devices and tones? So, I would say maybe the first thing I would recommend to you, and this is going to sound very teacher esque, but there's a truth in it, and that's knowing the different types of terms. Um, you know, g- if you know what Bildungsroman is or double entendre, go on and drop it in the chat. But if you know what a simile is, if you know what a metaphor is, you can drop that in the chat also. It's about vocab is a very important part of this. Any reading class, first off, but especially in AP Lang, because you can use those words to your advantage or your disadvantage. You know, so if there was one thing I could give you about recognizing it, it would be to know your definitions of those terms. And there's some very apparent ones like, juxtaposition or contrast, Bildungsroman, double entendre, metaphors, extended metaphors, imagery. They're very basic, but as you become more familiar with them and as you realize that you can use certain things and relate them to each other, then you're answering the question correctly. Now, when it comes to recognizing them, that goes back to as you're reading, drawing conclusions. It's like reading a sentence and then reading the next sentence and seeing. It's like if the first sentence is, the girl crossed the street, and then the next sentence is, but the light was green, so she had to be careful. It's a continuation of the sentence before, so you kind of you're analyzing also. You're saying you can imagine it almost. Kind of imagine what you're reading as a movie. You know, imagine a girl crossing the street and see her looking both ways to make sure she doesn't get hit by a car, and then she maybe runs across the street a little bit. And I like to say that reading is kind of like you're like reading a script more because the movie or the images that you make in your head, that is what's going to help you recognize. Are there certain things we can practice daily or over the course of the year to help? Um, I have the prep book over there, and I won't get it, but if you are able to, a great resource, if you have the money to pay for the book, is the Princeton Review AP Language book. They have practice tests in there, multiple choice practice tests, and then they do have some that are essay prompts, and obviously you can't have people read your essays, but we will be doing here at Fiveable, we will be doing an essay, an essay stream. Viewers will be turning in their essays in response to a prompt that we release and or a past College Board prompt, and we'll be grading your essays and telling you this is what you did correctly, maybe here's what you need to improve and stuff like that. So definitely, that book is amazing, and you could even just do the multiple choices, check your answers, know what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong if you're doing multiple choice, focusing more on rhetorical analysis. The book has tips and tricks and stuff to help develop an analytical mind and to ask those important questions. But if you're not able to afford the Princeton Review or the Barron's book, Khan Academy. Khan Academy is an amazing resource also. I like Khan Academy mainly because the sometimes a lot of people argue that the answers are wrong, but the Khan Academy does provide explanations of their answers, and even though you won't have highlighters and stuff like that on the AP exam, it's a good place to start. It'll let you annotate easier, it'll let you ask questions easier, and and then strike through answers. That's another thing. Uh, Eliminate questions or eliminate answers as you're reading them. If you were reading it and you were analyzing it and you say, oh, C didn't happen the way that it says it did, go ahead and erase it, because then the 2 or 3 answer choices that you have left increase your chances of getting the question correctly, and they also increase your chances of maybe allowing you to go back and look at a more specific place in the text. So over the course of the year, I don't know if your AP Lang teachers are making you read books, but mine did. But if not, I would recommend maybe buying some, basic books. Like, I have some right here. You have In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, East of Eden by John Steinbeck, The Seven Spiritual Laws of Success, which is more of a how-to guide, but it's still, and, you know, trying yourself and experimenting with, I can read at this pace and I can analyze at this pace. How do I shorten it? Or how do I make it better? So that's a really good question. But I, as you do it more, you definitely will be able to do it. It's a matter of conditioning. But that was a really good question. All right. All right. If there are any more questions, I'll go ahead and answer those before I head on out and leave you guys with the rest of your night. All right. I think that might be all we have. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming out. Be sure to follow Fiveable on our social media, and be sure to tune in next week for some of our other rhetorical analysis streamers, Catherine Howard, and then stay tuned for some of our ones regarding me in the future. If you enjoyed this stream, be sure to tune into our replays and make sure to make your account and get Fiveable Plus, view the replays and all that, get access to some exclusive content. But as always, thank you guys so much, and you have a great rest of your night. Thank you.